TVOT.
We keep hearing that multi-platform plays are the future. As you can see from the number of people on this day, distribution requires an army. So I'm going to let Arthur Arduino here intro all these people and set up the dialogue. We'll save a little time at the end for questions. So be at the ready.
Okay, first of all, thank you to everybody who's on this stage, and I'll briefly run through names and titles. I think that's one of the classics of Tracy's TVOTs. I think we've all gotten used to that, is these large, very inclusive discussions, as opposed to smaller, less warm discussions. That's all I can think of. I'm just looking at all of you going, wow, I hope we like each other because we're tied up on the stage. Oh, hello, Elizabeth. So here's how we're going to do this, the objectives for this. No AV. Everyone here has been very kind to me about that. We're going to keep this as a moderated discussion. I've got some questions from an objective perspective, not from a Canoe perspective, although Canoe is objective, aren't we? An objective perspective. And then with approximately 10 minutes or so left in the hour, and we're going to end right on time at 1:55, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Now, if you have something that's just so pressing prior to that you need to ask it, hold it in, because we will definitely we'll give you time for those questions, all right? So, but first, a quick rundown, and then I'll kick it off with the first. So immediately to my left is Nick Troiano, who's president of Black Arrow. I didn't even have to look at the card for that. That's good. Thank you. Ashley Still, to his left, who is the director of product management, Rich Media Solutions for Adobe. And she didn't have to travel very far to get to this at all. Robin Wilson, to her left, who's VP of Business Development for Nagra Vision. As a former Canal Plus Media Guard marketing person, hello. And to Robin's left is Rick Herman, who's SVP of Business and Corporate Development for Moby TV Incorporated, who had to travel a little further across the bridge than Ashley for this one. And then to Rick's left is Richard. Let's keep that straight. All right. Richard Shirley, who's VP of Distribution Business Development for AETN. That's the new brand, Richard?
Yeah, we're A&E Networks now.
A&E Networks, sorry. Okay.
This is perfect for the multi-platform discussion.
I am so glad. And then to Richard's left is Ed Humphrey of Softel, one of our platinum sponsors here, so we will ask him softball questions. No, we won't. And then, or at least, Sam Pemberton does not want to ask softball questions. And then batting cleanup, and last but not least, is Gabe Sauerhoff, who is VP Digital Media Distribution for Discovery Communications. A really, really good group of folks, very, very diverse, and should be able to give us a pretty good view from different points of that ecosystem. So in fact, let's get started with the first question, which I'd like all of the panelists to answer, kicking off actually at the far end and making your way back in. Little surprise there, Gabe. So in order to tell us a bit more about yourself and your company as an intro, why don't we do that in the perspective of, first, how would you define, from your view, what multi-platform distribution is to you, and what you see as the primary challenges of that for you and for your company?
Sure. Thanks, Arthur. At Discovery, I handle digital media distribution, and that in and of itself means it's really a cross-platform opportunity in business that we look at really every day of the week. From a definition of multi-platform, what we think about is really, a single service that is offered on multiple devices, right? I think, and specifically as a cable network group, we're very, very focused on video. I think that there can be, a multitude of various offerings that extend across different devices, interactive offerings, things that don't necessarily connect directly to video. But when we think about it, at the end of the day, we produce great content, and we want to get that content in the hands of of consumers in all different ways. And so when we think about challenges in that space, I think historically, I think working in the digital distribution business has kind of been working on what some people would call science projects from time to time. It's kind of been off on the side. People in the industry, we all think of it as core to what we do, but from people who might not work on it, it's kind of, it doesn't really contribute that much to the bottom line, at least not yet. What really is it? What is it really contributing to the business? And so I think the resulting challenge from that has been historically for cross-platform or multi-platform distribution is monetization, right? And an example of that for Discovery has been that we've been pretty out front and public with our stance that the economics for us just haven't been there to support full-length video distribution for free online. We just don't see how that makes sense for our business in our particular unique positioning. And I think that what is going on now is that multi-platform is really transitioning from that science project, as I mentioned before, to a core part of the business, right? You don't just have alternative distributors, if you will, getting into the game. It's very much at the core of our discussions with operators now. And so going forward, I think that the challenge for cross-platform distribution will transition sort of from the monetization challenge much more to how do we efficiently and successfully predict the changing consumer behavior and evolving consumer behavior that we're seeing right now. I think there's no doubt that cross-platform is very much the way that content is being consumed in a very, very aggressive form from consumers, and that will just continue to grow over time. So how do we anticipate that? How do we give consumers what they want while also running a successful business at the same time?
Thanks. Ed?
Sure. Softel, our business is and has been about delivering interactive content out to the viewer. And over the years, the definition has changed a bit. We've viewed ourselves as a company supporting multiple platforms, multiple middleware throughout the course of our existence, and we continue to do so. Those platforms, however, are expanding at a rapidly increasing pace, certainly over the last few years. We've seen in sort of the core areas for us, we've supported cable, satellite, IPTV, terrestrial broadcast for linear television. That's expanding with HBB TV, which was mentioned on an earlier panel. It's hybrid broadband television, as we're seeing in Europe. And of course, the non-linear distribution methods as well. As we go to multi-screen viewing, the number of platforms to be supported grows even further. I think the challenge for people who are trying to include interactivity with the content they're delivering across multiple platforms, one of them is just making sure that you have the ability to deliver that there is a common platform that you can build your interactive content to, and then testing across what in reality is a myriad of platforms. As much as you'd like to have commonality, ultimately there are differences between them. They're fairly significant in some cases, and that can mean a great deal of testing to get interactive applications built and delivered across this wide array of platforms that we see today.
Okay, Richard?
Thanks, Arthur, and thank you everybody for your time today. So I work for A&E Networks, which I think is a great point to emphasize today. We're no longer A&E Television Networks. We are A&E Networks, and I think it's very reflective of the fact that our job as storytellers is to use all of the various platforms and distribution channels at our hand to become more effective storytellers. And when you look at, the question of what is multi-platform is almost irrelevant in a way because it's constantly changing. The things that were around 3 years ago, some of them are no longer around, and things that will be here 3 years from now, we have no idea of what they are today. So I think we sort of take a look at that landscape and try to understand as best we can how is the very rich palette of tools that we have to tell our stories changing, and how can we make the most effective use of them. They also have a big impact on the other participants in our industry with whom we do business. And I tend to look at the world in three separate buckets of masters that we serve. On one front, there's our distribution partners. How does new technology and new platforms how does it change the distribution landscape? We've enjoyed a very lucrative partnership with our traditional distribution partners in the past, but now with new technology and new platforms, that's changing, of course. There are new entrants. Some of the barriers to entry are getting lower. So you have to answer questions such as, how do I protect that lucrative relationship with the partners I've had in the past, and who are the new guys in town that I should be keeping in mind as well? The second party that we pay a lot of attention to is our advertising partners. Obviously, the new platform, we're a company that relies to a very great deal on advertising revenue, so we have to keep in mind, well, how do these new technologies and platforms help us to be better partners to the sponsors and advertisers with which we do business? But then ultimately, going back to the idea of being a storyteller, we have to be mindful of how technology and new platforms are, again, affecting our ability to tell stories and engage the subscribers and viewers that we serve. Because ultimately, if we're not doing that job, we're not doing a very good job for the distributors or the advertisers either.
Great points. I agree. And, just as a quick aside, I was trying to figure out why I and so many of my colleagues and friends love TVOT. Love coming out here to Tracy's particular show, not just her weekly. And I think, Richard, you hit a good point about it, about the fact that we can be so cloaked sometimes and so focused on the technology and some of the cool bits and bytes around this stuff that we kind of forget that at the core of this is creative. And at the core of it is telling a story in really cool ways to people. And TVOT has a great mix of, I'm shilling, obviously. TVOT has a great mix, even where it is, here in Yerba Buena. It's a strong reminder that at the core of this is an artist's vision somewhere, right? And that's what we're all helping to try to convey. With that said, Rick, and Moby TV, I remember when your company started. That was a cool start.
Thank you. So Moby TV, primarily what we do is we are an end-to-end managed television service provider for carriers, operators, and content providers. By way of example, we are, for the tier 1 carriers in the US, we do the white label carrier branded television solutions nationally for T-Mobile, AT&T, Sprint, and we are the NFL and Verizon. And additionally, we have a bunch of tier 2 partners, a bunch of content partners, studios, and a number of international deployments that are pretty interesting in this context because they tend to be more convergent, multi-screen deployments rather than traditional mobile deployments. So it's some good stuff. They asked us earlier what we mean when we say multi-platform, and I really think the simplest way to think of it is multi-screen. And really, this is about delivering content to people's screens wherever they are, anywhere, anyplace, anytime. And that becomes obviously very complicated when you're switching networks from cellular networks to Wi-Fi networks to broadband to this, to that, to the other things. So I think some of the challenges that we all face are, well, how do you get across all these different platforms, all these different devices? And how do we provide a quality experience? And that's sort of what Moby TV has been focused on for the last 10 years.
Thank you. And Robin, you're going to provide a unique perspective on here. Nagra Kudelski, I'm not sure if everyone is aware of what Nagra is or does, but you play an extremely important role in this ecosystem as well, too.
Yeah, so we provide a few roles. One is content protection. So that means we're biased towards the premium content end of the business. The other couple of roles related is the middleware and the application space that helps consumers navigate. And then maybe a subset of that, we have a group that develops advertising targeting technology, and we even have a development now for a second platform like a pad or something to optimize the targeting for that particular device. And our customers, because of the nature of what we do, our customers are never end users. They're always broadcasters, aggregators, or MVPDs in the FCC speak. So we are sort of driven by them as opposed to necessarily consumers, and there's sometimes a conflict there. I mean, one of the conflicts we see is our customers are playing both an offensive and a defensive role in terms of over the top. So most of them feel a little threatened, so we have to help them provide their own either alternative or equivalent to over the top, at least for their subset of programming. So that's what we get involved
So are they pushing you at this point into a very solid multi-platform strategy, especially your security side. I would kind of see you almost as a litmus test that this is moving from trial to business, right? When they're saying make sure that premium content protection is happening on a multi-platform perspective.
We're starting to do content protection on the smaller platforms, the pads and so on. So far, we've been doing that not as a DRM provider, but in the house, in the home network, bound to, in a sort of cryptographic sense, to the home gateway or initial set-top box. So it's a limited domain, but that's the one domain the operator cares a lot about.
Okay, thank you. And Ashley, Adobe.
Yes, so clearly Adobe's entire history has been about enabling people to create and distribute content to every screen possible. And I really liked what Richard said about kind of this notion of future-proofing your experiences and these great stories that you're trying to tell. And on the video delivery side, that's absolutely where we see playing a huge role. Flash obviously is used broadly. 70% of all internet video is delivered using Flash. And we are looking at how we enable you to deliver your stories and experiences not only to Flash-enabled devices, but to any device. So for example, on mobile, obviously Android ships with Flash Player and Air is supported on those devices. But also on iOS, you can use Flash authoring and Air to actually create native iOS apps that you can distribute through the Apple Store. So I think one of the things that people don't have enough context on is how Adobe is really enabling you to deliver your video experiences to any screen, whether or not it's enabled with Flash. In addition to just the core, can you get your content and your experiences to those devices? Another area where we're starting to play a much more active role is what we call on the business enablement side. So we just launched a service called Adobe Pass for TV Everywhere that basically handles entitlement on any screen. So again, whether it's Flash or non-Flash devices. And already we have a number of programmers using Adobe Pass, people like Turner and CNN, to enable linear content online that's entitled by your pay TV subscription. We have about 50% coverage of the MVPDs in the US today. That'll be in the 80% range by August. And really, we see huge opportunity in the context of TV Everywhere to bring a lot more content and ad inventory online. And we think it's going to be really kind of explosive growth over the next year.
How's Adobe Pass, sorry, Rick, just one quick thing. How's Adobe Pass positioned with regards to something like Ultraviolet?
So Adobe Pass is really just about the entitlement. It rationalizes between the kind of the programmers and the MVPDs whether or not you've paid your cable bill that month. It isn't actually protecting the content.
Okay.
So Ultraviolet, is more about both.
Yeah, sort of that total digital locker in the cloud for yourself, right? Okay.
But we're very active in DECE and obviously around Ultraviolet as well. So
you're supportive of Ultraviolet.
We're supportive of DECE. We have to see where Ultraviolet
I'm not trying to
goes.
put you on the spot. I'm just I'm just curious. That's I guess why I'm sitting here.
Yeah, certainly we believe that consumers want to have access to their content on any device, and DRM should not get in the way.
Okay, thank you. And now Nick. So Nick, first of all, congratulations on the news today. The Time Warner investment is great. Black Arrow has been doing extremely well, and would love to get your view on how do you define multi-platform, and what role do you see yourself and Black Arrow playing in that?
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the time. Black Arrow is a privately held company backed by Time Warner, Comcast, and a number of actually folks in the room, Cisco, NDS, Intel, and others. And we provide business and technology solutions for advanced advertising across what we consider new TV. So new TV in our parlance is really on-demand content across broadband, VOD predominantly, broadband, any time-shifted medium. Those are the solutions that we offer. We offer them to both cable operators and, in some circumstances, to both programmers. And when we think of, or at least when we think of the challenges of multi-platform or definition, I think it brings to question, at least in our world where we work with service providers, is what is a subscriber? And I think when you think about multi-platform, and Richard and others touched on this, what it really means, I like the multi-screen example of how consumers are time shifting and watching content. But I think what the challenge of multi-platform really brings to the forefront is who is the consumer, why do they watch it, and who owns them? Because if you answer those questions, you can figure out advertising models and business models around pay TV and not. And I think the challenge is it's very hard. Because when you're in the home, you're one consumer, you're one subscriber. When you're out of the home, you're another. You're a mobile carrier subscriber or you're a Comcast subscriber. And how does that consumer change, both in terms of watching traditional or long-form content, but also short-form or other mediums? And I think when we think of multi-platform, if we can try to understand how the consumer will view content and what they want and why they watch it, ad models and storytelling models for programming and content will follow. But I think that's kind of the root of where we see some of the biggest challenges.
So let's dwell on that just for a second, Nick. I'm going to ask you to start off on the next question, which is still looking then at advertising and the ad models today in multi-platform. Where do you think it is working today? Where do you think it's still sort of undeveloped, definitely nascent? What do you see as some steps to getting us to a more fully realized ad-fueled multi-platform environment, right?
Yeah, I think Chris Fall said it earlier today, and as did the panelists from the multi-platform event earlier. 80–90% of ad revenue is still television, despite the fact that consumption is occurring across these multiple devices and it's growing. So what I think the challenge is, even where you see consumption growing, there's the ad model for these other devices is impression-based, it's audience-based, and it's based on targeting. Whereas television, it's very based on data, whereas television is, but it's not. So when you look at the transition and how you expect evolution to occur, certainly within the pay TV world, the subscriber world, data, you have to rationalize where you can actually follow that user and the use of that data. And if we solve that problem, where programmers and operators come to an agreement about how data can be used across devices, I think you will see more success. As a result, if you look at the most vibrant usage of the best models today for this new advertising, it's online and it's through the ad networks. And the number one reason why agencies buy on ad networks is targeting. The number two is reach, because it's an aggregated play. So we know that's a challenge. We know that's what one-to-one and multi-platform means for the industry. But it starts with, I believe, it starts with the consumer, who owns them, and then what's that data? How do you actually track that user from a data set perspective?
Good points. I want to throw this open to the rest of the panel, hopefully get everyone to chime in here. Ashley?
Certainly. So I agree with everything that Nick said. I think the other thing I would add is just this notion of having an equivalent currency, and whether it's C3 and everyone getting comfortable with Nielsen measurement and feeling like that accurately represents the viewership online is huge because I agree, the inventory's building. I think TV Everywhere will help put more inventory online, but you have to have inventory, you have to have the currency, and then you also have to have the workflows. I think one of the things that I know Black Arrow is looking at solve, and there are a number of other companies kind of focused on other areas, but particularly from a delivery perspective, we're looking a lot at how delivery and ads are on the content delivery and ad delivery are really two separate workflows right now, and they need to become a little bit more integrated in addition to having the currency and the inventory availability.
From our perspective, it's down to bits and bytes a bit more in the sense of if we're dealing with protected content, and you will know this, Arthur, from your work, it's often less than trivial to splice different ads in. Particularly, it's been a long time coming in set-top boxes, barely working now. When we get into other devices, there may be better ways than just splicing them long form, and I think Adobe and others are doing that. And I think that's where the other platforms will come into their own, not try to replicate the old world, but come up with a different form and therefore a different type of ad, and that gets all the way back to our ad targeting business. So we have to
Yes.
think quite differently for different platforms.
I agree, but protection throughout that entire chain. I mean, like following an asset across multiple platforms, different usage, but same subscriber, right? And same
Yeah.
kind of, and to your point, actually, same degree of entitlement or varying degrees of entitlement around there. That's not a trivial matter to make that work at scale.
We don't want to encrypt the ads. It's just the programming around
The programming around the
but
ads, yeah.
It's almost the same problem.
Exactly right.
I do think the agreeing on the metrics of how we're going to handle advertising would be a good next step for the industry in general.
You think?
Yeah. One of the things we run into in our business is obviously we have tons of data because we are serving television across all these carrier networks. And then you get organizations like Nielsen that come in and say, and no offense to anybody from Nielsen, but they say, well, we'll take what you do and we'll extrapolate and then we'll reach conclusions about the extrapolation, right? As opposed to the actual data itself, which we already have, right? So at some point, we all kind of have to agree, what a dollar is and what an impression is. And I think when we get there, then we'll have a more open, advertising model in the non-traditional distribution methods. The other thing I'll say is we're going to see a lot more of this. And the model will be tested. The MCV initiative is coming. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. But
Can you
yeah.
thumbnail on that one?
Sure. It's a group of local broadcast affiliates who have licensed spectrum, and they're going to distribute free-to-air broadcast channels, includes Fox and NBC and others, and they're going to do it on non-traditional devices like tablets and phones. We're powering that initiative, so again, that little plug, but it's...
Is that trialing starting this year?
Yeah, it's coming this year, and it is intended to be just like your TV at home, ad-supported rather than kind of more of a pay-per-view model. So all of these issues are going to come to a head. Obviously, it's a very disruptive time in the television business.
Cool.
I'll just add one more piece to it, I guess, in a little bit of a different extension. As we think about advertising, clearly the focus is going to be as a means to revenue generation, as well it should be. It's a major revenue stream for certainly for Discovery. But it's also critical as we talk about advertising in the context of, for example, TV everywhere or video on demand through our cable operator and other MVPD partners. It's a critical path to actually unlocking the best content in the best window, right? And to Richard's earlier point about telling the story and about creating great consumer experiences, if you don't have the currency, to use the point that was made earlier as well, if you don't have the currency in place, it's going to be hard to offer all the content that you might want to, because you're not really going to get credit. You might be taking away viewership from the linear network, or if you're not, you're certainly not getting credit for it, and that impacts the decision of what kind of content do you make available, how much, in how far after it airs on the linear network do you put it on these alternative platforms. So getting the advertising piece fully baked from end to end with a currency and whatnot is critical to making money, but it's also critical to actually having the best consumer offering and what we'd ultimately like to be able to provide to viewers.
Yep. I mean, to the questions about advertising, I have kind of a scary story to share.
Good. We like scary
in my role as a storyteller. VOD, set-top VOD. We've been, the business has had VOD for more than a decade now. We've been aggressively supportive of the set-top VOD platform for a good 8-9 years. I've seen some studies in the past from Black Arrow and others that try to determine how many hours people are actually spending with the on-demand platform versus linear and other platforms as well. I wanted to get more of a feeling for, okay, what does that mean for A&E networks? Where are viewers spending the majority of their time? So I worked with colleagues in research to sort of do some rough proxies of where we stand. I'm not going to share what the exact numbers are, and it kind of depends a little bit depending on what network you're talking about, but it's certainly a measurable percentage of the overall time that viewers spend with our content. And if you ask yourselves, okay, am I doing a similar ad business with VOD, relative proportionately with linear? I mean, the answer is hell no. It's nowhere on the radar. It's very immeasurable, as a matter of fact. So if we've been in the VOD business for 10 years, and we haven't gotten to the point where we're extracting meaningful revenues from the platform, it makes you think, well, wow, how quickly along are the other platforms gonna follow, and what do we have to do to change all of that?
Provocative and good question. I know, Nick, you've been anxious to jump in on this, and I want to make sure that Ed has a chance to jump. Nick, go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment that I don't think, and Richard's part of the AMP initiative that Black Arrow is a part of it. I think instead of everyone rushing for, our belief is instead of rushing for consistent metrics, we think the industry needs to take a step back and actually understand the consumer and understand why they watch VOD. And you were alluding to this. Why are people watching VOD as opposed to the content on DVR, as opposed to online, or as opposed to any other medium? Because that, at the end of the day, the advertiser wants to reach a consumer and sell something. So if different environments create different experiences or allow for different addressability, not in the targeting sense, but the ability to reach a different audience a different way, that itself is value. That is not going to be quantified in correlating a metric with Nielsen. So we believe part of our AMP initiative with A&E and Discovery and others, and the 4As and the like, is to start with the consumer. Validate, why does the consumer watch VOD? What does it mean to them? How do they look at VOD in the life cycle of watching a TV show or a piece of content? How does it compare to linear and DVR? And then what does that mean to the consumer as an experience? And how does that translate into engagement metrics? And just to end, I mean, my wife is a perfect example. I'm not going to tell you how old she is, but she watches content on live TV, DVR, and VOD. She does not watch a commercial on DVR. She does watch it on VOD. And I think it would be really valuable for people to actually understand why a woman in northern New Jersey does that. And what is that metric? And that is a much more powerful message to go back to the agencies and to the buying community, because that's about experience. And when you think about multi-platform, that is how you tie it all together, because platforms matter and environments matter. And I still think it starts with, I understand the rush to money, because of course we benefit, we all do. But if we don't take a step back and quantify it through research, I think we are setting ourselves up for commoditization of impressions and then persistence of the Nielsen model, which we kind of know doesn't really work.
Ed, do you want to jump in on this, and then I'm going to kick off another question with you too.
Yeah, I mean, just a reflection on some things we see, which I think back up points that have been made here by others, which are, as we talk to partners of ours in the technology space about delivering interactivity with ads and VOD content that are dynamically inserted and targeted and addressed, and a response we get back is, well, the systems that are present in a lot of cases in either the operators or the programmers, and they mean back office systems, aren't there to be able to even build these sort of ad insertions yet at this point. And I think what that is, I mean, with respect to the programmers on either side of me, is a reflection of the fact that, well, yeah, they're not ready yet, to be really selling this kind of ad content. Still learning how to do it.
So we've mentioned the consumer now, and I think, Nick, you definitely raised this up. Let's move all the way from one end of the ecosystem, which is the ad dollars sitting there, all the way to the other end, which is Mr. and Mrs. sitting there in their homes, surrounded with staring at least one screen. But now I think reflected in a lot of panels, not just in this one, the idea of multi-screen, the old new idea of multi-screen. So from your perspective, though, where are we truly there? What are consumers, what are these viewers really asking for versus what we're prepared to offer or what we're trying to offer today? So one of the issues around ITV for the last 20 years is criticism sometimes leveled at it is the technology and the capabilities have outstripped really what people want or what people understand in front of television. Are we at that place with multi-platform? Are we making too many assumptions about that viewer today? Who wants to jump in on that one first? Robin.
So just some comments on that. I think we shouldn't, even though this is about multi-platform and content, we shouldn't overlook what I would call the control plane. In other words, a lot of the utility of multi-platform devices doesn't actually have to be to show long form video. It may be no video at all, just a JPEG of the guide and some search and some utility. There's a lot of utility in an iPad-like device or even an iPhone-like device. Just navigate while you watch the big screen. And it may have some pre-rolls and Flash or something, but not the whole protected movie or something. So I think the utility is there without even going to video. A lot of the utility, actually, and that's the low-hanging fruit. It's relatively easy to pull that off without a great deal of investment in multiple streamings and multiple securities and all that kind of stuff. So that's just a thought. Don't forget the control plane.
Okay. Good thought. Good reminder. Rick?
I think what we've noticed, at least with respect to consumer behavior, is that people do consume differently depending on the screen they're watching. And that seems obvious, but up until recently, it was relatively difficult to validate that position. And now that we have more screens out there, tablet devices, which form and function-wise maybe move a little bit away from a traditional phone-type screen, and all the way to the PC and then back over to the the big screen TV. People consume differently. What we see in non-traditional screens in general is if there's something big happening live, a sporting event, a news event, a weather crisis, usage spikes.
Yeah.
But then if you talk about length of viewing, they're consuming tons and tons of VOD for longer and longer periods of time on the non-traditional screens, and then you see the spikes driving kind of traffic to the, when something happens, the inauguration or Michael Jackson dies or these sorts of things. So, if you go back to the position of, okay, what's going to drive the consumer experience, I think you have to look at consumer user behavior, and again, it is all about, I want it now if it's really important, and then I want a lot of a buffet of choices in VOD, so I can offer those to, hand the tablet to my kid, all the other use cases we can all think of.
Yeah. So just adding to that, so we talk a lot about device profiles, and we look at consumers. Everyone has their device profile. They have television, mobile phone, maybe a tablet, desktop, etc. And it's really about using that device profile to create the richest experience holistically. So we've seen people do really interesting things where you have a app on a tablet that just helps you either follow the plot or get more information about the content that you're watching online. And increasingly, we're investing in this notion of synchronized companion content, where it's not necessarily that you're watching the football game or the television show or whatever it is on both your mobile and the TV, but that you've kind of synchronized and complementary experiences across those devices. So I think that's the future. I think the technology is getting there. But it is pretty amazing that if we all think about what is probably the shining example of multi-platform distribution right now, I would say it's Netflix. So today they came out, they're 25% of all North America traffic. And inherently what Netflix offers is just access to the exact same content on different screens. And that's pretty basic in terms of what we're talking about in terms of technological capability. But it's the consistency of the content, the availability of the content. People probably have 7 different ways that they can watch Netflix at home. And so I think hopefully we're much more progressed in 5 years, that everybody gets that access, but this notion of device profiles is much richer.
So let's focus on Netflix for a second, because that was something I wanted to ask all of you, and I'm glad you raised that up. Netflix definitely from a distribution perspective has impressed us, but now there's Netflix the producer. Right? There's Netflix not only purchasing and cutting these carriage deals for existing content, but going out there now and actually acting like HBO did a decade ago, and like what Discovery and A&E networks are doing right now, acting like a network. Right? So first of all, your thoughts and the ramifications of that. Are we on the cusp of something new here, or are we seeing someone actually, or are we just seeing a company evolve into a different part of a different but well-defined part of the ecosystem, like one of your competitors at this point, right? And definitely, I think Richard and Gabe, I'd like you to crack at this one first.
Sure. I love the Netflix subject, and it's a great one because in thinking about how multi-platform changes the landscape, it's turning our competitors in some cases into our customers and vice versa. So it becomes harder and harder to figure out where we're all aligned in that ecosystem. But I think the really interesting thing that Netflix makes me think about is how successful they've been in terms of rolling out multi-platform. In the media business, scale is really everything. I mean, going back to the days when the printing press was first discovered or invented, allowing content providers to build things quickly and efficiently and get them spread across the greatest footprint possible. I mean, kind of a stretch, but if you think that Netflix is building scale by taking advantage of technology, it's easy to see, just how far that they've gotten. They've made a pretty seamless experience available to their subscribers over a multitude of platforms, and it's sort of like, I don't know if any of you had the chance to hear Don Dolcinos' discussion earlier today, but he, in one of his 3-word answers, he said, loose but tight. And in a sense,
we're still trying to figure out what he was talking about specifically.
Well, I know how that applies to the Netflix scenario, so I'll be done in about 15 seconds. I think with Netflix, they have the back end is very tight. They're able to offer the experience because they're great at account management. They know who their subscribers are. They know the type of things to recommend to them. But then on the loose side, they can do that through any distribution platform, whether it be over your PC or through a set-top appliance or a mobile device. So I think they've made a lot of us in the industry think about how these things are really working.
How about you, Gabe, from the discovery perspective?
I would echo the point about, I think they've been successful not just because they're on so many devices, but because when they are on a device, the consumer experience is very, very compelling. The search functionality, all the features, the rich feature set that is enabled by the IP connection and the backbone of being an IP-based service, I think is truly a major success factor for them. I think addressing them more holistically in terms of the place in the industry. As a content producer, we try to be very mindful about following the eyeballs, right, and about finding consumers, potential viewers, wherever they may be. And I think consumers have spoken fairly loudly that many of them, find that service to be compelling. But for us, it's not just about being there and having, a presence where those eyeballs are. It's also about doing that in a productive way that ties back to and makes sense to our core business, right? And throughout the multiple platforms that Discovery has expanded to over the years, we've always kept an eye towards what does this mean in the larger perspective. We can't just look at one form of distribution on its own and not consider the greater whole. And that means obviously considering what content they have, or when it's made available to them and whatnot. And we're very focused on, of course, driving the most value back to our MVPD partners, because that's where the value comes from, and that's where we've had a tremendous partnership over the last number of years. At the same time, new places to get paid is not necessarily a bad thing in this business. It just has to be mindfully done to tie back to be additive as opposed to something else.
So Gabe and Richard, could you ever foresee a situation where you would actually countenance, say, doing your branded but original programming for a Netflix distribution channel?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Could you see at some point Netflix doing a deal with Netflix? I'm not saying are you, but just could you see a situation where the Netflix multi-platform distribution channel would be so attractive to you, and your brand would be so attractive to them, that you could do something original that would be Discovery branded, or something original that would be A&E branded, but specifically for Netflix distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I see your point now that it's original for them. I don't see that as being anything that's in the cards in the foreseeable future. We're a media company, and that means we want to get our content, produce the content, and get the content in front of as many people as possible. And that type of approach for us as a media distributor and as a content creator doesn't make a lot of sense. For other content creators, it might make more sense.
Okay.
Just not us.
Just want to point out, top 5 media companies make between 50 and 90% of their operating cash flow from carriage deals. That's a statistic. One of them is sitting on this table at this panel. So that's a reality that Netflix and others will face, and that's also why I think the service provider, whether it's Comcast or AT&T or anybody else, while the whole multi-platform TV everywhere strategy will have some legs. The one thing I do think that Netflix has done terrific. Remember, they were a CD delivery business, so they had a very strong customer base. They knew a tremendous about that customer base, and what they really, really did well, which I think is important for TV everywhere and anything else we see for multi-platform, is they launched the service as a product. They thought about who their target customer base was, who they identified their target customer base, the early adopters. They packaged the service and went after them. So when we think of whether it's VOD, whether it's online or TV everywhere or tablets, we try to work with our programming and our operator partners to think of how do you actually bring this to market, not just to the advertisers, certainly to the advertisers and to your partners, but just to the consumer, because that is fundamental to how adoption will occur. And I think Netflix is a great case study of how they mined an in-depth existing customer base and took a new product to market very, very well.
Okay. Thank you. Good point. I'm going to open this up now. I think we have about 10 minutes. We have 15 minutes?
10.
10. We have 10 minutes left. So I would open this up. I have plenty of other questions to ask here, but I want to see if anyone else has a question right now. And if you do ask a question, I would ask that you state your name and what company, or if you work for yourself, the name of your company.
Kevin Shaw, Sensor Platforms. I was intrigued by the recent Netflix announcement that they would partially be releasing Netflix for Android because of the content, the subscriber digital DMR, digital media rights requirements, which basically means that a large fraction of the Android devices would not be able to play that. Do you foresee this impacting the market for these secondary screens where some of them do not have strong enough digital media rights protection for these types of applications?
I'd like to shoot that to both Robin and Ashley up here too, and Mr. Ed down there, who've been a bit quiet. If the three of you could take that.
So yes, absolutely. When it gets to premium content, I mean, the reason I think, without knowing too much what goes under the hood in Android, is Android isn't all just one system. There's security issues which depend on the CPU it's running and how that's working and so on. So much as Google and anyone else who does an OS would like to pretend everything's all nice and equal, when it gets down to nasty stuff like security, it's down to the physical attributes of dozens of different processors. So it's going to be interesting, and I think you'll gradually get more and more trust, and maybe a few fallbacks as things get hacked and resets, and then it gets back up to a high level of trust over time.
Agreed. Ashley, your view?
Yes. So as you said, there's certain aspects to what gets shipped on Android. On the client side, Flash Access is our DRM technology that is part of the Flash runtime. But even if that is present, if there are hardware considerations or OS considerations that don't meet the security requirements, there's not a lot, obviously, that Adobe can do about that. I think it also speaks a little bit to Google's approach around Android and how I think over time for areas like security as relates to content, copyrighted content protection, you'll see them, I think, this is not anything that Google has said, I think you'll see them come out with more specific guidelines for their partners.
Okay. And Ed?
Because it will hurt them.
Yeah, agreed.
Yes.
I mean, this is just one of the fundamental trade-offs of an open platform versus a closed. And, in the case of an open platform, the way you deal with this is you bake it into the standards, or you make it a part of the core definition of the platform. So you may see it evolve that way, coming from Google. But it's going to take some time.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
You're on, Arthur.
Oh, good. So let's talk about predictions for a second, because I do want to make sure that we close on time. So I want to get at least 2 more questions in from everybody. So, in this multi-platform space, I would love a prediction. The more wild ass, the better, if you want, and we'll hold you to it. 1 to 3 top predictions over the next 12 months, hopefully provocative. What do you see happening? Who wants to start? Come on.
I got one.
Okay,
Since
Ron.
I have a video codec background. I'll just throw this one out.
All right.
I think WebM will become a major a member of MPEG LA, and that will help level things back into maybe a stability again on H.264 and successors.
That would be a very good thing to happen.
I think so. I think some people.
Would you bet on it happening?
Well, I just knowing what I know about how it works, it seems to cover about 5 or 6 of the key areas of technology and MPEG.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
Ashley?
So the number that I pick will be provocative. I think 75% of the content that's available online, you will need to be entitled to watch in 12 months.
That's good. That's a good one. All right, come on. Ed.
TiVo will sue someone or be sued by someone.
All right, that's we count that as half a one, but that was pretty good. That was pretty good. I want this from everybody. Have Discovery.
Well, if I was really good at predicting things, I probably still wouldn't be working at all. I'd be retired. But I would say that I don't know. I think that what you'll continue to see as multi-platform distribution continues to take hold and grow is just more competition, more folks entering the content distribution business, more competition between networks trying to carve out share of voice. And connect with consumers in really meaningful ways. So those are a couple of things I'd see.
Okay, Richard.
Sure. I have 2. One sort of a soft one. I think this year dynamic ad insertion for VOD will become acknowledged as more of a legitimate, a meaningful commercial opportunity. So that's one. So on the more provocative front. You brought up the issue of Netflix before. I'm starting to, wonder a little bit more about how others, I call them the Uber aggregators of content, not just the Netflixes, but the Amazons or the Googles of the world. I think it would be really fun.
And there is that company sort of sitting there quietly with a whole bunch of folks, called eBay, with its Kairetsu.
Exactly. I think it would be really fun, interesting, and discussion-provoking if a consumer could find a way to purchase HBO Go through Amazon.
That's a good one. Rick?
I think that a big issue in the coming 12 months will be security of the content across multiple screens, multiple platforms. I think that's going to be a big deal. And I think you're going to see everybody except Microsoft, Google, and Apple searching for alternative DRM solutions, security solutions, that aren't tied to competitive distributors, right? So I do think security is going to become an increasingly big deal.
You're making Robin happy right next to you.
And Adobe.
And Adobe happy. Both of you.
And us.
I think, I don't know if Ashley will like this, but I think Adobe will be purchased by a big Silicon Valley conglomerate this year, in 12 months. Yes, I am a shareholder.
Do we have information on that? Where are we on the timing wise? Couple minutes? 2 minutes. Okay, perfect. 2 minutes. So this will be fast. One last go round, and Nick, why don't you kick it off for us? What do you want the folks in this audience to come away with? If there's just a headline or maybe an action you'd like them to take regarding this space when they get back to their lovely offices the next day or at the end of the week, what's the takeaway?
I would say start with the consumer. Consumer research should be at the forefront of every decision that you make, whether it's advertising, programming, and start there. And if you sell that way to your affiliates and partners, I think you'll have better success. Or my own view, that is.
I was going to say there's going to be a ton of competition between programmers, between programs and distributors. The experience will win. Use the device profile to create the best experience around the best story.
Robin?
Say there's over the next few years a huge amount of maturing of all the different codecs and streaming and smooth streaming codecs and all the DRMs and so on. I think we just at the beginning of maybe 5 years of turmoil, which will actually end up in a much more coherent situation when it comes to the end, I think.
Okay.
I hope.
Rick?
I think it all comes back to user experience. I agree with the others. Right now, a lot of the distribution is tied to devices or screens or accounts, and it's kind of cannibalized. And I think, if you come back to the principle of how do we unify the user experience in a way that people can access the content easily without having to have 17 passwords and everything else, I think really that's the future.
Richard?
Yeah, I started off my comments with a little discussion about storytelling, and I think that was echoed in these other comments by the panelists. It begins with the viewer. It begins with how do you tell the story. And I know we tend to moan and gripe about the state of affairs and why progress isn't being made on certain fronts. But at the same time, isn't it a lot of fun? I mean, it's sort of a very Machiavellian, Darwinian, call it what you want kind of environment out there. But it's a place for good, meaningful competition, and I think all of us in the room are happy to be working in this industry. And I think if we keep to the initial vision or purpose of meeting the needs of our viewers, what bad can happen from that?
Ed?
Yeah, I guess I'd say focus on getting the video delivery right, because it all starts there, but don't forget the interactivity as well.
Definitely. And Gabe?
Sure. I think that focus on how to make multi-platform additive to the overall consumer experience and to the overall content ecosystem. I think then the opportunity is there for everyone to win.
Let's thank this fine panel.
You were the lucky few. They turned away a few dozen people out there. So hope you had a good time. If you could take discussions out to the hallway, that would be fantastic.